The moment I saw my name tag at my granddaughter Sarah's wedding, my heart sank. It read, "The elderly woman footing the bill for everything." I stood there, frozen, the words on that tag burning into my mind. I never expected to be humiliated like this, especially not at a family event meant to celebrate love and happiness. It felt like the room had shifted, the joyful chatter of the wedding guests suddenly distant, like a soundtrack playing in the background while my world collapsed in silence. I had spent weeks planning for this day. I wanted to see my family come together, to share in the happiness of the next generation. But instead, I found myself treated like a mere bank account, my presence only valued for what I could contribute financially. As I walked to my seat, I tried to push the hurt aside, but it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the label on my name tag. It was everything that had led to this moment, the way my children and in-laws had slowly distanced themselves from me over the years. Sarah, my precious granddaughter, was getting married, yet I felt like a stranger among them. They all smiled, posed for pictures, and celebrated, but not a single one of them looked at me with the warmth I had always imagined would be there. All I wanted was to feel like part of the family again. But in that moment, I realized how far I had been pushed out. I had given everything for this family, my time, my resources, my love, but in return, I was nothing more than the woman who paid for everything. As I sat down, trying to make myself as invisible as possible, I noticed how the others behaved. The table was set with fine china, the guests were laughing, and yet the only thing that kept running through my mind was how I was nothing more than an afterthought. No one had bothered to thank me for what I had done. No one had asked if I was okay. Instead, I was simply the one they relied on when they needed something. But I wasn't going to sit quietly and let them treat me like this anymore. I had been silent for too long, and something inside me had finally snapped. I could no longer be the silent matriarch who quietly endured the disrespect. They thought I wouldn't stand up for myself. But they were wrong. As the evening unfolded, I kept my gaze down, silently stewing over what had happened. I would not let them think I was weak. I wasn't going to let them continue to take advantage of me. It was time for me to take control of my own life again. The wedding continued around me, but I felt like I was watching it through a fog. People danced, laughed, and celebrated, but my mind was miles away. I had been so excited for this day, to see my granddaughter marry the love of her life. I had imagined being surrounded by the warmth of family, of feeling like I mattered, even as the years had gone by. But now, all I could focus on was the label on my name tag, the one that marked me as nothing more than a walking wallet. Every glance in my direction felt like a reminder of the distance that had grown between us. I had spent so many years trying to be the glue that held everything together, always the one who gave, never asking for anything in return. But now, it was clear that they only saw me as a source of money, a tool to fund their dreams. My son had barely spoken to me in years, and now I understood why. Greg, my son-in-law, had always been polite, but distant. Emily, my daughter, would smile at me, but I knew deep down, she resented me for being in the way. They all had their own lives now, their own families, and I was just the old woman who was holding on to the past. The evening passed in a blur. I smiled and nodded, pretending to enjoy the festivities, but I was dying inside. I had given everything for this family, and in return, they had taken my love, my time, and now, they were taking my dignity. As I looked around the room, I could see the subtle hints of how they saw me. The way Greg spoke to me with that forced smile, the way Emily avoided eye contact when she passed by. It was like I was invisible to them, like I no longer mattered. It hurt more than I could put into words. I had been a mother, a grandmother, a wife, and yet, now, I was nothing but an afterthought. But I wasn't going to let them continue to do this to me. I wasn't going to let them think I was just going to fade away, silently suffering. I had spent too many years taking care of them, putting their needs before my own. It was time for me to stand up and take control of my life again. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me. I deserved better than that. As the night went on, I excused myself from the reception. I needed some air, I needed to clear my head. I stepped outside into the cool evening, the sound of the music faint in the distance. The night was still, but my mind was racing. I stood there, alone, in the dark, and realized that I had been living in the shadows for far too long. It was time to step into the light. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. The hurt from the night before was still fresh, but it no longer felt like a weight I had to carry alone. I wasn't going to let them continue to see me as nothing more than an ATM. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling through the window, I could still feel the sting of that name tag. It was like a slap in the face, a reminder of how little they thought of me. But instead of letting the anger fester, I decided it was time to confront the truth. I had spent too many years being the silent provider, quietly accepting their disregard for my feelings. But I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I needed to have a conversation with Emily, my daughter. She had been avoiding me for days, and I could feel the tension building between us. I knew something was wrong, but I wasn't sure how deep it went. I tried to remember the last time we had a heart-to-heart, but it felt like a lifetime ago. Emily had always been close to me, but lately, it seemed like she had grown distant, like she was more focused on her own life than our relationship. I had watched her grow from a little girl into the woman she was today, but the woman she had become wasn't someone I recognized anymore. I couldn't ignore it any longer. As I sat in the quiet of the kitchen, I steeled myself for the conversation I knew was coming. I wasn't going to back down. I was done being the invisible matriarch. I picked up the phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang several times before she finally picked up. "Hello, Mom," she answered, her voice flat, almost distracted. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her take a deep breath. "Okay," she replied. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking a lot about last night, about the way things have been going with this family, and I can't just ignore it anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want to know why you and Greg have been treating me like this. Why is it that I'm only valued for what I can give, but never for who I am?" There was another long silence, and I could hear the sound of Emily shifting in her seat, probably trying to figure out how to respond. "Mom, it's not like that," she finally said, but I could tell her words were rehearsed, like she had said them 1,000 times before. "I just think you're overreacting." "No," I replied, my voice stronger now. "I'm not overreacting. I've given everything for this family. Everything. And what do I get in return? A label on my name tag, a feeling of being completely invisible. Do you think I don't see it? Do you think I don't feel it?" I could hear her sigh on the other end, a sound that seemed like a mix of frustration and guilt. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said quietly, "but I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to say the truth," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "I want you to admit that you've been using me, that I've been nothing more than a tool to help you get what you want." There was a pause, and then Emily spoke again, her voice softer this time. "I didn't mean for it to happen this way, Mom. I don't know what else to do. We're just so busy with everything, and I don't know how to fix it." I felt a pang of sadness in my chest. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was something. At least now, she was acknowledging what had been going on. "You need to start thinking about what's best for me, not just for yourself, Emily," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm not going to sit back and let you use me anymore. I've spent my whole life putting everyone else first, but now, it's time for me to take care of myself." I hung up the phone with a sense of finality. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew I had taken the first step in taking back my life. The days after my conversation with Emily felt different. There was a strange sense of clarity in the air, but also an undeniable weight. I had spoken the truth, but now I was left to deal with the aftermath. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind, wondering if I had said the right things. Emily's response was so defensive, so distant. I had hoped for a real apology, something that would make me feel like she understood the depth of the hurt I had been carrying for years. But instead, there was just that vague guilt, the kind that never fully acknowledges the wrong. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, the house felt too quiet. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, the empty spaces louder than ever before. The silence of my home was no longer comforting, it was suffocating. I hadn't realized how much I had relied on the idea of family until that moment. All these years, I had believed that love and loyalty were enough to keep us together, that they would always see me as more than just a provider. But now I saw the truth. I had been living in a bubble, one where I convinced myself that they cared, that I still mattered. But that bubble had burst, and the reality was harder to face than I had anticipated. The next day, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window. At the quiet street. I had made the decision to take control of my life again, but I knew that wouldn't be easy. There were so many things I had to confront, so many questions I had to ask myself. Where had I gone wrong? How had I allowed myself to be treated like this for so long? And what was I going to do about it? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to sit idly by anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my worth any longer. It was time for me to live for myself, to take back the pieces of my life that I had lost along the way. I stood up, walking slowly to the living room. It was time to start making some changes. But first, I needed to take one more step, one final confrontation with Greg. I had never directly confronted him about how I had been treated, but the time had come. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed him to understand that I was no longer the easy target they had been using. I had to stand up for myself, for the first time in years. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Greg answered after the third ring. "Hello, Helen," he said, his voice calm, like he already knew what was coming. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, despite the nervous flutter in my chest. There was a long pause before he replied. "About what?" he asked. "About everything," I said. "About the way you and Emily have treated me." He sighed. "Helen, I don't know what you want me to say. Things have been difficult, but you have to understand." I cut him off before he could finish. "I don't need you to explain. I need you to understand that I won't stand for it anymore." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear him processing my words. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't going to back down. "I've been your mother-in-law for years, Greg," I said. "And I've always supported you. But I won't be used anymore. I won't be the one who pays for everything and gets nothing in return." He didn't say anything for a long time, and for a moment, I wondered if he had hung up. But then he spoke, his voice quieter. "I didn't realize you felt that way." I almost laughed, but I stopped myself. "Of course, you didn't. Because you've never had to. But that changes now." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and fear. I had done it. I had spoken my truth, and I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready for whatever came next. The following week, the silence between Emily and me was unbearable. I had expected some kind of response, some attempt at reconciliation, but instead, it felt like a wall had been built between us. The house, once filled with the laughter and chatter of family gatherings, now seemed empty and cold. I spent my days in quiet reflection, wondering how things had gotten so far out of hand. Greg had called a few days after our conversation, but his words felt hollow. He apologized, but it was clear that he was just going through the motions. I didn't need an apology that wasn't genuine. I needed action. I needed change. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of being used and ignored. One afternoon, I decided to visit Sarah's house. My granddaughter had been distant, too, ever since the wedding. She had been my light, my reason for holding on to family traditions, but even she seemed to be avoiding me now. I wasn't sure if it was because of the wedding or if it was something else, but I wasn't about to let this go on any longer. As I arrived at Sarah's doorstep, I took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was time to confront her too. I knocked, and after a moment, she opened the door, her face lighting up in a smile when she saw me. "Grandma, it's so good to see you," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I smiled back, but the warmth I once felt when I was around her seemed dimmer now. I could tell she had been avoiding me, and I needed to know why. We sat down in her living room, and after a few minutes of small talk, I decided it was time to ask. "Sarah, honey, I need to know something. Why have you been avoiding me? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken for a moment. Sarah hesitated, then shifted in her seat, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. Grandma, it's not that I'm avoiding you. It's just, well, things have been a little tense, you know? I nodded, but I wasn't satisfied with that answer. I don't want to hear that things are tense, sweetheart. I want to know why. Why has it been like this? Ever since the wedding, it feels like everything has changed. Like I'm the last person anyone wants to talk to. Sarah looked away for a moment, her fingers twisting together in her lap. It's just that. I don't know. Mom and Dad have been really stressed, and they're not handling things well. They've been talking about a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with you, but it's been affecting everyone. What kind of stuff? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Sarah hesitated before speaking again, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been talking about money and the house. They think it's too much for you to handle. They want you to move into a retirement home, Grandma. They've been talking about it behind your back. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had suspected something like this, but to hear it from Sarah, of all people, stung. So, they want me gone? I asked quietly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. I'm sorry, Grandma. I didn't want to tell you, but I thought you should know. I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it sink in. They wanted me gone. My own daughter, my son-in-law, had decided that I was too much of a burden. I had given so much of myself to them, and now they were pushing me aside, treating me like an inconvenience. It was hard to swallow, but it was the truth. I stood up, my knees feeling weak beneath me. Thank you, Sarah. I needed to know. But don't worry about me. I'll handle this. I could see the concern in her eyes as I turned to leave. Grandma, please, don't be upset. You know I love you. I know, sweetheart, I said softly, giving her a reassuring smile. I love you too. As I left her house, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. It was time to make my move. I couldn't let them do this to me. I wasn't just some old woman they could push around. I had fought for everything I had, and I wasn't about to let my family take that away from me. The following days felt like a whirlwind. I had been processing everything, but I knew that I could no longer sit back and let this happen. The truth had been laid out before me, and now I had to take control. I spent my mornings walking through the house, reflecting on the years that had passed. It was strange, this house, once filled with the warmth of family, now felt empty, like an echo of something that used to be. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall, carried the weight of memories that now felt like burdens. But I couldn't let it keep me down. I had to do something. That afternoon, I sat down at my desk and started writing a letter. It wasn't going to be an easy letter to send, but it had to be done. I addressed it to Emily and Greg, with the intention of making them understand how much they had hurt me. It wasn't just about the money or the house, it was about respect, about family. I had given so much, and now it was time to remind them of what I had done for them all these years. I poured my heart into the letter, carefully choosing every word. I didn't want to come across as bitter or angry, but I needed them to see the truth. They had taken advantage of my love and my generosity, and it was time for that to stop. After a long while, I finished the letter. I sat back in my chair, staring at it for a moment. Part of me hesitated, wondering if I was doing the right thing. But then, I remembered the hurt, the isolation I had felt for so long, and I knew that this was the only way to move forward. I sealed the envelope and put it in my purse. The next day, I would deliver it. But that evening, as I sat in the living room, I heard a knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Emily standing there, looking uneasy. Her expression softened when she saw me. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked quietly. I hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She entered, and we both sat down in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air between us. Finally, Emily spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice shaky. "I know I haven't been the best daughter, And I haven't treated you the way you deserve. I could feel the sincerity in her words, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. Emily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've given everything for this family. I've always been there for you, for all of you. But the way I've been treated, it's been too much. It's not just the money. It's the way I've been pushed aside, ignored. Do you know how it feels to be invisible in your own family? Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. I do now, Mom. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I've been so caught up in my own life, in my own worries, that I didn't see what was happening. I've been selfish. You've been selfish, yes, I replied, my voice firm. But it's not too late to change. We can fix this, Emily, but it starts with honesty. It starts with respect. There was a long pause, and then Emily reached out, taking my hand in hers. I want to make things right, Mom. I don't want you to feel like this anymore. I squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Then show me, Emily. Show me that you mean it. That night, I went to bed with a strange mix of emotions. There was still so much to be done, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope. Emily had acknowledged her mistakes, and that meant something. It was a step in the right direction. The next morning, I decided to give her some time. I wasn't going to rush anything, but I also wasn't going to wait forever. I needed to see action, not just words. As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the letter I had written. I had been ready to send it, but now, part of me wondered if I should hold off. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. I couldn't let my guard down completely, but for the first time in a while, I felt like things were starting to shift. Days passed after the conversation with Emily, and slowly but surely, things seemed to be changing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Emily made more of an effort, calling me more often, asking how I was, what I needed. It was the little things, the way she asked about my day, the way she seemed to truly listen when I spoke. It felt like the wall between us was finally starting to come down. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too quiet. Greg hadn't said much since our last conversation. The brief exchanges we had felt forced, like he was avoiding the elephant in the room. I knew he had his own struggles, his own battles with the guilt of how things had unfolded, but I couldn't ignore the tension that lingered between us. I decided that I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't let my own fear hold me back. It was time to have that difficult conversation with Greg. I needed him to understand the depth of my hurt, the weight of the decisions that had been made without me. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I wasn't going to let him hide behind his silence anymore. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the weight of knowing that this conversation could change everything. Greg picked up after the first ring, his voice hesitant. Hello. We need to talk, I said, my voice calm but firm. I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. What about? He asked. About everything, I replied. There was a long pause. I knew he was processing, probably trying to figure out what I wanted from him. Okay, he said quietly. What's going on? I took a deep breath before answering. Greg, I need you to understand something. The way you and Emily have treated me, it's not just about the house or the money. It's about respect. It's about the fact that I've given so much to this family, and I've been pushed aside like I don't matter. I've been a part of this family for so long, and yet, I feel like I've been forgotten. I could feel my heart racing as I spoke, but I didn't stop. You don't get to decide for me. You don't get to make choices about my life without consulting me, without even asking what I want. There was another long pause. I could feel him trying to come up with a response, but there was no quick answer to this. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know you felt like this, Greg said, his voice quieter now, more sincere. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone. But now I see that I was wrong. His words felt like a step in the right direction, but they didn't undo the damage. You were wrong, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not asking for you to fix everything right now. I'm asking for you to start treating me like I matter. Like I'm still a part of this family. There was silence on the other end of the line. I wasn't sure what he was thinking, but I didn't want to rush him. Finally, Greg spoke again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've been so caught up in my own life that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I didn't see what was happening until it was too late." "It's not too late," I replied, my voice softer now. "But you have to show me, Greg. You have to prove that you care." "I will," he said, his voice steady. "I promise I'll do better. I don't want to lose you, Helen." The words didn't completely erase the pain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. Maybe, just maybe, this family could be whole again. The days that followed felt like a quiet transformation. The tension in the air had begun to fade, replaced by a tentative peace. Emily and Greg were making an effort, their actions speaking louder than words. They had apologized, but now I could feel them trying to show me that they meant it. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for me to begin trusting them again. One evening, after dinner, Emily asked me to join her for a walk. The sky was a deep shade of orange as the sun set behind the trees, and there was a calmness in the air that seemed to match my mood. We walked side by side, the silence between us not uncomfortable, but peaceful. "Grandma," Emily started, her voice hesitant, "I know I've let you down. I've been selfish, and I'm sorry. I want to make things right." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a while. There was sincerity in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. "I've made mistakes too," I said quietly. "But I want us to move forward, Emily. I want to rebuild what we've lost." She nodded, her hand brushing against mine. "I don't want to lose you, Grandma. I'll do whatever it takes." That moment, in the fading light of the evening, felt like a turning point. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that things could change, that our family could heal. I wasn't expecting everything to be fixed overnight, but this was the first real step. As we walked back to the house, I thought about all the years I had spent trying to hold everything together. The sacrifices I had made, the love I had given. But I also realized that it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, about finding a way to be a family again. The next few weeks were filled with small gestures of kindness, Emily checking in on me more often, Greg offering to help with things around the house. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I still felt the sting of the past, the hurt of being ignored for so long. But there were also moments of real connection, of shared laughter and understanding. One day, Emily and I sat down together to go through some old photo albums. It felt strange, but in the best way possible, to be sitting there with her, reminiscing about the past. "I remember when we used to do this all the time," Emily said, flipping through the pages. "It's been so long, but I'm glad we're doing it again." I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in years. "Me too, sweetheart." That afternoon, as I looked at the pictures of our family from years ago, I realized that even though we had been through so much, there was still so much to be grateful for. I didn't need perfection, just the willingness to try, the desire to be better. And in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth it. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, with my family by my side.